Well, Tim, we're back again now. Boy, I tell you, I sure like Bobby Hull and Gordie Howe. They were really something, I'll tell you.
Yeah, those are great shows, and it's funny how well they hold up over the years.
You know, it's a funny thing. I hate to say this. It sounds better on radio than it did in television. Yeah. And Jimmy Loftus and the guy singing, and it was like we made it for radio.
Yeah, it was. It was like a good radio play. And Dave Schultz was interesting.
Dave the Hammer Schultz. I didn't know that. I read his book, the Hammer. It was a pretty good book too. But I never thought I did. There was one guy I used to think about when before a game all the time. Or here I go again. And this guy was Gordon Labossiere. I never forgot. He's a great big guy, about 6'2". And Dave the Hammer Schultz said that he couldn't sleep before he went.
So like you and Gordon Labossiere, you guys like fought almost every
Yeah, and he was a big, tall guy, and he was all elbows and stick, and every time you went in the corner with him, and he didn't like me for some reason, and then I didn't like him, and every time, and I remember Darryl Sly had a fight with him. I don't know why Darryl was ever fighting with him, and Darryl was really cut up bad, like he was really, and I'm not saying the guy's name, but we're in Baltimore. I never forgot it. And he was kidding him. He said, yeah, Billy. And Darryl was really cut bad. And so I said, I had to stick my nose in. And I said, well, why don't you fight him? You're supposed to be a tough guy. And he said, well, I said, well, you're kidding my buddy Darryl. At least he tried anyhow. Boy, did he ever get it. And the boss, they could throw him. So Dave the Hammer Schultz said, I liked it, like when he said, and they had a crazy coach too that used to send guys out. Yeah. I never sent a guy out. The closest I ever come to sending a guy out was I was in Providence, and Bert Wilson. Remember Bert Wilson? Well, beautiful guy.
He played for LA for a while, right?
He did, and he come from Shelburne, Ontario, and he married a girl from LA, brought her to Shelburne. Not knocking Shelburne, but I mean LA girl. She left him, and. I remember he was fighting with somebody, and I said to John Wensick, I'll never forget it. Boy, what a deal that was. And I said, John, would you like to take a shift on that line? And boy, I'll tell you, it was World War III. I never forgot it.
He was really tough, Bert Wilson, because I remember he fought Stan Jonathan one time. And it was a really good go.
He was a left-hander too, and I remember John. Anyhow, on that one, it was World War III. It had in the paper a long time ago. I think they still do in the New York Post. They had the picture in the back, World War III, and had bodies piled up. I remember Ron Fogel broke his leg, and I said, well, how did I get into this? I mean, all I asked him was to take a shift, and I looked up, and the owners were up in the box up there, and they wouldn't have anything to do with me. I don't know, they come, and I look around, and here's 2 State Street. They'd called the police. And these guys had leather jackets on, and they had the big jack boots. And I thought, what in the world's going on? So I had a brand new suit on. And I remember John Muckler was the coach of Providence, and he started to cry. That's how bad it was. And he come on the ice. And John Bondarski, who played for me the year before, and brand new suit. I didn't want to. So then all of a sudden I thought, and he wanted to go at me. And I never forgot that. And I thought, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Never mind the brand new suit. Now I want to go. And you couldn't believe it. The police were there.
So that was like in the movie Slapshot.
No, listen, the movie Slapshot, let me tell you about that. Nothing happened in Slapshot except, the guy took his clothes off. Yeah. But the worse things happened in the minor league than happened in Slapshot. The only thing that was different that we didn't do, we never got stitched on the bench. We always went in. And I remember the very first time the guy got stitched, the guy put gloves on. I thought, he put gloves on. And then near the end of my career, they froze it. And I thought, but the worst, how did we get into this? I don't know how we get in.
Whether you're going to talk about Slapshot or not, I mean, you have a lot of good inside stories about Slapshot.
Well, we'll talk about Slapshot next week.
Yeah.
We got. There's so many stories about Slapshot that we got to talk about. So we'll talk about that next week.
Yeah.
So, Dad, let me ask you a question about Dave Schultz. Always made it that he fought, but he fought because he had to fight. He didn't really like fighting. Now you were known as a fighter. You were the tough guy. You were the enforcer on the team. Did you enjoy fighting, or were you like him? Did it because you had to do it?
There is no feeling in the world, none, when the other guy is a good fighter, like Labossiere or one of those guys, to drop your gloves, and the other guy is, and you could get hurt, you get your jaw broken, and you could get hurt. To drop your gloves, and the other guy is mad, not mad. I was never mad in the fight. You
were never mad. You were never angry.
The only time I was ever angry was a guy named Mike McMahon. Cross-checked me from behind, and I went head first into the boards, and he cross-checked me so hard that he kept on going, and I come up underneath, and he was there, and I remember I hit him. That was a beauty. No, I was never, and I knocked all his teeth. I knocked 5 of his teeth out of the front. He was just a kid too.
This is when you felt bad though after.
Yeah, and then I started to get a conscience. That's when you really get hurt. I don't know, how did we get into this?
Well, I just asked you a question.
About Schultz. No, I don't blame Schultz. I mean, he had one guy, like he said, he had one guy would really fight, and he was the only guy on the club.
But how then, if he's the only guy that can fight, like why were they called bullies then? I mean, they got the reputation.
They were like a wolf pack.
They were tough. But if you're saying only one guy can fight on a team.
One guy could really. Oh, there was one guy, Ben Wilson. He could really throw him.
Yeah, but Ben, he came a little bit after Schultz.
Yeah,
he wasn't during the Stanley Cup times.
I think the funny story that it was a fight going on in the corner, Jonathan or something, and Winsink was standing there, and we won't say the guy. He paid for me in Colorado. Walked by and pushed Winsink from behind. He turned around, and there's poor Schultz standing there, and he just went wild.
Well, that was you always said too that went in the one playoff series, it was getting pretty nasty, and Bobby Clark went up to Schmatzy and said,
"Oh, I like that." It was a big brawl going on, and Bobby Clark says, "Come on, Schmatzy, somebody's going to get hurt here." And Schmatzy, "Yeah, and right it is." And he says, "And it ain't going to be me."
I can see Schmatzy.
Boy, I'll tell you, we have to do it someday. We'll have to do that about all those things. We used to have exhibition games. Geez, exhibition games. We used to have more brawls than exhibition games.
So, I was going to ask you, when they had in the Spectrum, the old Spectrum, they call it the Cashman Gate. Was he fought Schultz?
No, what happened was that it was Holmgren.
Oh, that's right.
It was Holmgren. And what happened was he fought one of our guys, I think it was Jonathan, and Jonathan had a knack of hurting an eye, and he hurt his eye in the fight, and he was out quite a bit. We must start at the start, but I'll just tell you about Cashman Gate. They call it. They were going up in between. They were going up going to the restroom. They were thrown out of the game. Him and Holmgren, and he hollered out. He says, "Next time I'm going to get your other eye," and that was and Holmgren went nuts.
So they were fighting in the halls.
They run down the hall, and then nobody could stop. Cashman, he was there, and they had a stick fight, and everybody ran up and fight in the hall. Jeez, I went up in the hall, and they were. It was jammed. The police couldn't get in. They'd call the police.
Was that the fight that George Plimpton missed?
And George Plimpton missed.
Because he was doing an interview and he missed the whole thing, right?
You know what? Let's not talk.
We'll talk about
that. Goes on and on and on.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week too.
Okay, but anyhow, no, Schultz was pretty good. It was a good interview.
Write these things down. What we're going to talk about next.
No, but so that was a good interview with I never knew things. I never knew. But again, I'm not saying that he was the only guy that really would throw him. The rest of the guys would throw him, but not like him. He was the best. And I liked it when he said we had 4 guys going.
Yeah, because back then it was, as he said, it was just him, and it was Terry, and then
if you get through Terry, you got to go through Winsink, and then you got to go through Secord, and then you go through Jonathan. Yeah. And they all liked to fight. Terry never liked to fight. You'd had to force him into fighting. I don't know. I don't know. John Winsink really liked to fight, but boy, could they throw him. I mean,
do you know who? I read an article one time that Dave Schultz. They asked him who were the toughest guys he fought. 3. I can't remember the third guy, but he said the first guy was Terry because I think how many times they fought. They fought in the American League.
Well, he was, yeah, but he.
And you know what the other guy he said was Battleship Kelly.
Oh, Battleship Kelly, boy, I'll tell you something. Someday, why not? When I first took over Rochester, I went to the camp. I went there and I couldn't get in. You couldn't get in. So I was pretty young then. I was still general manager, coach, but I looked pretty young. So I took off my shirt and tie, and I took off the tie and took off my jacket, and I walked in. And early in the morning, I was there early before anybody.
So this was the New York Ranger training camp.
Yeah, it was New York, and Emile Francis was there, and I was there before anybody. Now he used to take the goalies out at 7:00 in the morning, about 3 young goalies, and he'd see me sitting up in the stands, and all by myself. And
so you used to get in at the camps because
I used to limp.
The guards would.
Yeah,
think
the
you
guards
were a
were
player.
there. It was a tough game yesterday, and
So they thought you were a player.
They thought I was a player. So anyhow, I went in. So Emile Francis saw me up on about 3 days in a row. I was up there, and I knew that he had the Providence Reds, and then he was sending the rest of the guys down to the International League. So I didn't have any players with Rochester. I must go through this whole thing, and I had to beg for players and everything like that. So I went to him, and we should talk about that Gary Coulter. Remember we talked about him? Anyhow, I'll just ramble on here. So the first guy when I sat down with that, the first guy I said I wanted was Battleship Kelly. I said we could just get Battleship Kelly. And there was Battleship Kelly at New York camp. And I talked to Dennis Ball. He was a chief scout. And he came and sat with me for a while. And I said, I like that base. And he's promised to Baltimore. Terry Reardon, Kenny Reardon's brother. And I was heartbroken. So to make a long story short, I got a call. I don't think I was ever so happy in my life as I got a call from Dennis that said, "You still want Battleship Kelly?" Or Bob Kelly, they call him Bob. Holy smokes.
And what happened? Why didn't they want him anymore?
It was 500. He wouldn't give him $500 bonus or something. $500 we got made us. Boy, I'll tell you, I'm rambling on here, but I had a lot of fun. And Schultz, he was all by himself. He went to L.A.
Yeah, he's even more by himself then.
Really by himself in L.A. And he did have a good reputation. I mean, he really did. He was the toughest guy. And we used to zero in. And I never said a word to get him. But if somebody didn't get him, and boy, they used to have some good battles. He had a lot of guts. I mean, he never backed down from one fight. Never saw him back down. He never won against us, but he never backed down from one fight.
That's good. And so we're going to maybe continue that every once in a while. We'll throw some old Grapevine shows up.
Talk again. I'm going back again. I think they were made for radio.
They do. They do sound.
Boy, we were brutal at the start.
And the one thing that people will ask you, what's the major difference between doing the Grapevine shows and the shows now that you'll see on SportsCenter TSN is that we had a live audience, and I think that really added to it. That the people were really excited to go see the
people. I think really helped too, as we told, except for Ron Luciano, we used to talk about him someday, the umpire. Yeah. We used to tell him the questions before. Yeah. Especially, oh no, I want to be spontaneous. If you tell, and we took the Rocket, remember? Yeah. And the Rocket Richard, and told him what we were going to ask him, and he was relaxed, and they had fun. You weren't springing them. You didn't try to spring something on them.
Well, that's probably why you got a lot of the superstars.
Never thought of that.
Was because they knew they weren't going to be ambushed, and you got a reputation. That show got a reputation of saying it was a lot of fun. Their parents used to come. The wives came. Yeah. We had a nice dinner before. It was a real fun time.
I think we give them $500.
$500, but everybody.
And the tape.
Everybody, that's what they wanted, because back then there was no, you didn't see them. And they all said, "Can I get a video? Can I get a VHS tape? Because I want to show my mom." Yeah. And anybody that was around here always, remember Ty brought his mom
His mom, yeah, I remember his mom.
mom never come.
She never went to anything, none of his games. She didn't go out. And I said, well, haven't she had a nice steak dinner? She goes, my mom never eats steak dinner and all that. I've never seen my mom have so much fun at something. And I thought, isn't that nice?
Yeah, it was like the guy. You remember? Bob Probert and his wife came up and they had a nice dinner. Danny. Yeah, they had a
I remember I said, what's with the hair? And he said, yeah, I am having a bad hair day.
Well, isn't this date Mother's Day? Wasn't this the anniversary of the goal?
The goal, we thought, it was picked, that picture of him flying through the air was picked as the greatest picture of the century or something in sports. Now, Patrick Kennedy, a good friend of mine from Wolf Island, 50 years ago today, Mother's Day, right?
Today's Mother's Day. We're taping this Sunday. Yep.
Yeah, and he scored on Glen Hall, and I have a list here of what Glen Hall. I'll just read about Glen Hall. He had over 500 games, 500 consecutive games he played, 500.
Well, that will never be broken.
That will never be broken, and the guys can't even play 3 now. They used to play 5. He used to be sick before every game too. He's a Hall of Fame. Played over 1,000 games, consecutive games. What got him was he went to do up his skates and put his pads on, and his back snapped on him.
Back went on him.
He was Rookie of the Year, 3 Vezinas, Conn Smythe, Hall of Fame, Stanley Cup, and Bobby scored on him. And what happened was Bobby cheated a little. He used to go on the right hand side. Now, if somebody hadn't covered up for him and had got by, there would have been 2-on-1. That's Bobby saying that, never got by. So he kept the puck in and he put it behind the net, as you've seen many times. Give it to Derek Sanderson. He kept on going in front of the net, and Derek just hit him right. And top corner, went into the top corner, and Noel Picard, he was mad. He flipped him in the air. And he kept the stick on him, and that's it. Bobby, after, he would never do that, fly through the air like that. And he flew through the air, and the guy that took the picture from the Boston Globe or one of those, or Boston Herald, I forget which.
I'm not sure which one.
Anyhow, he didn't even want to be there. He got there late, and he happened to just catch that Bobby flying through the air, and now they made statues out. So that was the greatest game.
I think part of that, you talk about like broadcasters, Dan Kelly calling that goal
Dan Kelly.
I mean, he was one of the greats.
I remember Dan Kelly. He was the first guy I was ever on. I asked Harry. I was I was with the Boston Bruins naturally, and I asked Harry if I could do Hockey Night in Canada, and I was on with Dan Kelly doing the Philadelphia game. Imagine that. Yeah, and other people don't realize that. That was my first time, and I remember him. I never forgot. He asked me. He said, well, Don, what'd you think of the first period? He said, I'd answer you, but this guy keeps answering, talking in my ear all the time. So Danny, he never forgot that. And I have to laugh. I talked to Ricky Smith, and in the article that Patrick Kennedy had, they got $10,000 for winning the Stanley Cup. Now they get $200,000
a piece.
$200,000 they get right now for winning the Stanley Cup. When they used to win it, they used to get $10,000.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you talk about Ricky Smith. He's from Kingston. How many times is he on the ice for big goals for us?
Man.
Like maybe not got assists, but overtime goals, he'd be on the ice.
And he'd get the assist.
Or he'd make the first play and stuff like that.
And you never hear of him, Ricky Smith.
Because I remember the one goal Terry got in Chicago, overtime goal.
Yeah.
And I think it was second year where you were coaching and stuff, and he made the good play and all that. But every time it seems like
I call him the salt of the earth.
Yeah,
he's in Buck Lake. He lives on a lake.
No, I remember about Ricky Smith. It was he played with Gary Doak a lot, right?
Yeah, him and Doak used to play together.
And I remember after practice, like the Bruins kids, me and Scott Cashman and Wayne Cashman and Jerry Cheever's kids would go on the ice, and him and Gary Doak, Ricky Smith and Gary Doak would be at the one in the ice. And for an hour, they would just pass the puck back and forth. They go up and they go back and just constantly passing the puck for an hour. I guess just to get a feel of where they were going to be or whatever. But
Gary Doak was a funny guy.
Yeah. But they constantly passed the puck. And I guess, it's funny how you kept the defense pairs together.
All together, always
and
together.
Now they switch them up all the time. But I always remember those guys like 45 minutes after
Remember
practice.
Gary Doak from Goderich, Ontario? He weighed about 175, and he used to think he weighed about 300 pounds. He used to run out and hit guys, and he'd be hurt for the whole time. And I told him, I said, if you hit one more guy, well, I'm in hockey, I'm supposed to be. I said, you get hurt all the time. You're running a guy's weigh 200 pounds, you're hurt all the time. I said, I don't want you running again. And by God, he was a good defenseman. Him and Ricky Smith used to play together. Yeah. And I'll tell a story about Bobby Schmatz was like the straw boss. Yeah. Like if you wanted anything, that was the end of Bobby Schmatz. Someday I'll talk about him. He came in and he says about Gary Doak. We have a Gary Doak syndrome. And he says, Gary Doak's upset. What's he upset about now? He said, he doesn't like his pants. Oh. He says, and Danny was a trainer. Danny Canny was a trainer. He says, he won't give him new pants. So I called Danny and I said, Danny, give him new pants. What's it? That guy, he's the head case and everything. I said, well, give him his new pants. Give him new pants. So about three weeks later, Schmatzy come in and he says, I got problems again. What's the problem now? He said, Dokie doesn't like his new pants. He wants his old ones back.
I thought you were going to tell the story about Schmatzy and Ricky about what his daughter said when Schmatzy broke his nose. Remember that one? Well, maybe it was a wives thing. So, because Ricky Smith had his nose broken, it's pretty flat a million times and all that. And Bobby gets his nose broken, and his daughter in front of Mrs. Smith and all that says, "Oh no, is Daddy's nose going to look like Mr. Smith's?" Paula said, "You can't say that. That's rude." Well, and that was funny. Everyone was.
Did I tell a story about when he was? I was telling a story.
Yeah,
he told me he was late. Yeah. Ricky Smith, the very first time he was going to practice, very conscientious guy, and he's late. Yeah. But anyhow, by May 10th, Mother's Day. A great write-up, Bobby Orr flying through the air, and boy, did they attack him after. He was laying on the guy. I thought they were going to kill him anyhow. Bobby Orr on May 10th on Mother's Day scored the goal, and Arva, his mother, must have been awful happy.
So, Dad, we'll talk a little bit some of the stuff that's happened in the NHL, even though there's no games. And the one thing that caught your eye, my eye, was
your eye, actually.
The Toronto Maple Leafs signed Noel Hoefenmayer from the Ottawa 67s.
And nobody ever heard of Noel Hoefenmayer.
It was just a little write-up in the paper.
Little thing in the paper. Now, let me just give you some of his stats. I mean, he was drafted by Coyotes, Arizona Coyotes. Somebody here, Arizona has a scout somewhere here in Toronto because they got this guy. This guy used to play and he went for the Ottawa 67s. In 2 years, now get this, in 2 years, he got 144 points. I mean, and this is a defenseman now. He was plus 97. He led all Canadian Hockey League in game-winning goals
for defensemen. Yeah.
For defensemen. Now, Mikko Lehkonen was signed, and he was signed. There was pictures in the paper, write-ups, the whole thing. And Hoefenmayer. Leafs signed Hoefenmayer when Arizona turned. Arizona never turned. I can't believe Arizona never signed him. Yeah. I mean, I was saying, boy, he'll make that club like anything. Never even signed him. They had him, and Dubas had seen him play. Naturally, the guys had seen him play here. They signed him, but the little wee write-up. You know why? Because nobody knows him. Nobody knows about it, and the Canadian Hockey League does not. Publicize, promote, or whatever you want. I mean, you take this out west. The first time that they've ever had an exceptional hockey player, Connor Bedard. I think that's how you said Bedard. Yep. Nobody knows about him. Now this guy will be a star. Now when he becomes a star, we'll know about him. Now down in the States, when I lived down in the States, the basketball and the football, when you had them high school guys down there. It was unbelievable how they used to publicize them. Canadian Hockey League does not do enough, promote, get the guys. But I can see why, because nobody's ever at the games. We're at the games. And I know if there's a scout there or, from the National Hockey League, no scouts there from the National Hockey League. The scouts that are there for the junior hockey.
Yeah, but we don't see any media.
No media. I see the media when their kid plays. Yeah.
Yeah, when their kids play.
Their kid plays, they're there. As soon as their kid doesn't play anymore, we saw one guy at one tournament this year. We saw one guy, it comes to a tournament, he sees the guy, now he's an expert. And we're there every game. But I cannot understand why like this guy, Bedard, he's got to be, if they make him exceptional. He's
in the Western League.
In the Western League. The first guy they've made, he's got to be. Now, they'll be talking about him like Marner, nobody ever talked about Marner before. Nobody ever talked about McDavid or any of those guys before. We used to see them before. They do not. McDavid should have been, when he was playing minor hockey here around here, and then they should have pumped him.
Right, he should have been a superstar across Canada. But let me ask you, Dad. You got to give Dubas credit for signing Hoefenmayer.
Well, he knows somebody I don't know if he was never ever to see him either, but some scout was there, must have told about him.
Watching the 67s and stuff. So, and then there's all this fanfare with this Lehtinen coming over. My fear is that they're going to push Lehtinen. He's going to get all the chances, and then Hoefenmayer, who's a Canadian kid, played junior, but was the best. You could argue, say he was the best defenseman in the CHL last year.
Well,
he might not. He's going to have a tougher time making the club.
He'll have to work. That's why I've always said, when I was on TV, I always said the kids that were undrafted, they never had anybody push them. See, they were walk-ons. Anytime you have a walk-on, they have to make it pretty hard. Whereas if you had a number one draft choice, and I saw this many times, you had all the scouts pushing him. You had the general manager pushing him, because if he makes it, then it really looks good. Now I shouldn't be mentioning names, but that Hughes kid, he wasn't ready for the National Hockey League. He will be a star, but I mean they pushed him in New Jersey because they wanted a star there, and he wasn't ready.
In the U.S. Development League, they do tend to push and promote their players.
Yeah, but Canadian Hockey League doesn't.
They could do better. But you saw that. Remember, you said you were in New York training camp, and you were with Rochester, and you needed players, and you saw a blonde-haired guy.
It was a guy named Gary Coulter. No, it wasn't blonde. That was Bendarski you were talking about, John Bendarski. I saw this guy, Gary Coulter, and they had a good team, New York Rangers. They had a guy named Jean Rattel, they had centermen you couldn't believe. So I said to Dennis Ball, I said, I guess I can't get Gary Coulter. He said, what do you think you're going to get him? And I thought, he's going to make the National Hockey League. He was the best guy at the camp. And he says, no, we're sending him to Port Huron. No, I'll take him. No, I wouldn't. I'm begging him for him. And he said, nope. And what happened was he didn't have somebody push him. He was the best skater. He would have been absolutely fantastic. If nothing else, he would have killed penalties. He could, and never had a chance. Never had anybody pushing him. He just went there, did the game, and every game he was terrific. I saw their exhibition game, and on the ice he could skate better than anybody, and he was gone.
Just because nobody
pushed him.
Nobody pushed him. Well, remember we met him at a signing.
Oh yeah,
I think in London we met him, and I think because you wrote that in your book. We were doing a signing, and he said, "Do you remember me and Gary Coulter?" You remembered him right away.
Right away. He had I remember his brush cut. His brush cut. It was long. It was longer than everybody else, and I said, "I know who you are. You're Gary Coulter."
Yep.
And I think he was from Barrie or something.
We were in Barrie or in London, and then you had that same thing happen when you were trying to get John Wensink in Rochester.
Chuck Cato was the general manager. And I said, I'll take, I want John. And we had lost Bob Battleship Kelly. And and we were
You made a lot of enemies.
He made a lot of enemies.
There was going to be a lot of teams
and
gunning for your
And he
guys.
went to the National Hockey. He said, you listen to me. I must tell you about Battleship Kelly. So now we don't have Battleship Kelly anymore. There's a lot of teams waiting for us. So this is a true story. This is how goofy I was back in those days. I heard about John Wensink. I traveled and I didn't know what he looked like. But you got to be, if you're going to be tough, that was my problem. I looked like babyface Nelson. I was, and I said, I have to see what this guy's looked like. So, well, I knew they won the Memorial Cup in Cornwall. So I knew in the Hockey Hall of Fame, they'd have a picture of the team. So that's how goofy I was back in those days. I traveled to New York to see what he looked like. And oh boy, did he look good. He had the Fu Manchu. They called him wire. His hair was... So he went to New York camp, St. Louis camp, and after it was over, I says, well, what are you going to do with Wensick? He's, I don't know, we're set in the International League. He can't skate. And I said, no, I'll take him. No, Don. No, I wouldn't foist him on you. He can't skate. He can't play in the American Hockey League. And I begged him. I said, I will pay for his way from St. Louis to here and the whole deal. And when he finally came, he got off the plane with the skates. You carry your skates, if the skates had to be 90 years old. No wonder he couldn't skate. And he ended up,
same thing. Nobody was pushing
him.
So that's, you and I talked about that. We're afraid that's might happen to the
Well, I hope, I don't go, I probably, if I'm pushing him too much, but I mean, he was a good defenseman, boy. And minor midget, he used to play remember I mentioned it to him?
Yeah, I played for Don Mills, and he was, he played a lot. You always can tell, like a guy that the coach depends on, because they play the power play, they play the penalty kill, they play a regular shift, and he was on the ice all the time.
And Brian Kilray, we'll get into that. Mm-hmm. Brian Kilray and Bart Sullivan, they drafted him and or they recommended him because he was there all the time, and he then went to Ottawa and he had a good coach there, and he played a lot there, and Arizona. When I heard he got Arizona, he's going to make Arizona, because the guy we really liked, the big guy that the American, what was his name? Chickham. He went out there and Tockett's a good coach, a great coach. He was a great coach. He knew how to handle him, and Chickham really had a good year. So I figured he was really going to be Hoefenmayer, and they didn't even sign him.
Yeah, I know we're going a little bit long, but you know what happens with the Canadian kids is they start picking their games apart, and that's what happens. Even like when you and I go out scouting, and we see a kid a lot, we start seeing the negative stuff, and we start picking his game apart, right? Not me, but I do.
I hope not.
And when you start looking at the kid, you go,
No, the worst thing you could ever hear, ever, if you can really skate, if you're a good defenseman, he reminds you of Bobby Orr. Well, and then you go there, you expect to see Bobby Orr, and this kid, what I mean.
But I think that's what that's what scouts do. If you see the kid too much, you start picking his game apart. And I think with like a lot of the Canadian kids that are playing the CHL, the scouts see him a lot and they start picking the game apart. And he's like, well, he's not very good defensively. What was he? Like in 2 seasons, he was plus 97. And they knock him, well, he's not good defensively. And then they say, well, offensively, he just scores on the power play. He's one of those. Just scores on the power play. So
Jay Allison, remember, what's that his name?
Allison. Yeah, that he got knocked from the Leafs. They said, well, he gets a lot of points, but only on the power play.
Points. He's only on the power. But how about the games you're watching on TSN and CBC? Holy smokes! Taves, I see the write up of Taves in the paper. He said there'd be a suspension every shift. Talk about hitting it. Unbelievable. I mean,
I think you said the 80s was the roughest. You think?
I think the 70s. It was when they hit back in the 70s when I coached. They really hit. I mean, it was KO. But I think that, and the 80s were really good. And there wasn't injuries like there are now. And what happened is they know how to take a check. Like you take Gilmore, when you'd hit him up against the boards, he knew a hit was coming, because when you got near the boards and the hit was coming, they prepare. Whereas now, there's no hitting now. There's no hitting really, Tim. There's no hitting in the minor midget anymore. But say a guy burns his toast that morning, and he's and the guy doesn't know how now, and they don't have checking. I don't think they have checking in the minors till 12 years old.
Yeah, I think it's going up now to 13 or something.
13.
Like that.
So they don't know how. It's not so much hitting; it's that they don't know how to take a check. Now you see guys now with turn their back with their head down to the boards. You never saw that before. You would never think of doing that before. And as Tave said, the guys were watching. I think the kids were saying, didn't they ever call penalties back then?
Yeah, he was Jonathan Taze and a couple other guys. They were talking on an article in Toronto Sun, and they said they were watching. They grew up watching the Rock'em Sock'em tapes.
Yeah,
and they were watching the playoffs, and that's what Taze said. He says, "You watch the playoff highlights on the Rock'em Sock'em tape." He said the whole game, everybody would be suspended.
Yeah, every shift there'd be suspensions. I mean, the hockey back then, boy, as Peter McNabb said. I remember the interview they asked Peter McNabb, was the hockey rough back then? He says, yeah, it was big boy hockey.